Can a Christian get divorced and then remarry? The answer to that intriguing question will be answered in today's message as we continue on our Transformed series through the book of Matthew, a manual on discipleship. Here we end up in chapter 5, verses 27 to 37, which introduces the Jesus' understanding and standards of adultery and divorce and remarry, and then even about making oaths. And I think these three things go together for obvious reasons that adultery and divorce go together. But I think in the end, where Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, pertains to all matters of life, but in particular to choosing who's going to be your life partner. And so we should be dedicated, we should be devoted, not just to our spouse, but to God. And I think there's these parallels that Jesus is working with as we go through with this. So next, he's also teaching on, I'm going to be reading it here in just a moment, those 10 verses. And there was two schools of thought in the first century. One was one that believed that they interpreted some obscure passages that Moses gave in Deuteronomy in 22 through 24 to say that if anything displeased a man, he could divorce his wife. And that if anything, and so they would say, even if they just displeased him in any way, shape, or form for any reason, he could write a certificate of divorce and send her on her way. And that was considered legitimate. Then next we see that there's another school of thought in Jesus' day that said, no, unless she ruins the marriage through adultery, then no, you can't just do that. They saw it as a justice issue and they saw it as a moral issue. In particular, the institution of marriage is made more for the woman than the man, particularly in ancient society where there is a lot of protection required, especially while continually having babies and raising them, that you could be put in a very precarious position if you no longer had a provider. And so men would eventually abuse their power and just kick a woman out and go get another one willy-nilly. And it would end up impoverishing people because then you have these divorcees around that can't look after themselves. And many times they would end up falling into disrepute, having to go back to parents' houses or whatnot. And it would inflict shame on that person and poverty. And it's still the leading cause, divorce is still the leading cause of poverty in Canada, a first world nation. You think we would have got this beat by now, but we don't. It's the greatest cause of poverty amongst women and children in our country still. So divorce very clearly has a very negative effect on society. Now, Jesus here, as we're going to learn, is he takes on the more strict version of saying, no, it's not for any and every reason. She's got to be the one that torches it if you're going to write a certificate of divorce. And but as we go and unpack this, there's one thing I want to make crystal clear. It's like, yes, people can quote and wrongly in the past have kind of like wagged their finger at people who have had relationship breakdowns and said, God hates divorce. And I've been a pastor for a long time now, and I've counseled with lots of people in the community and in the church. And I can tell you another thing for sure is yes, God hates divorce, but so do divorced people. No one ever goes into marriage planning and waiting for the day, I can't wait till I get divorced. It's a very painful and real situation. And so, if we can try to teach on this subject without casting any shame and realizing that God restores people as well too, we're going to be unpacking this a little bit deeper. And we're going to have to jump through a number of different chapters and verses and even books of the Bible so that we can learn all that God has taught us in this area. So let's first just dive into these 10 verses and then we'll unpack it verse by verse as we continue through the book of Matthew. You've heard it said that you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anybody who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anybody who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows that you have made. But I tell you, do not swear by oaths at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything else beyond this comes from the evil one. So Jesus hits home quite harshly and quite deeply as he continues teaching that the purity must go more than on the outside. If you remember last week, we talked about murder, and God doesn't want us to just not murder to be perfect in that law, but He wants us to be kind to other people. He wants us to love other people, even those who mistreat us. And so as that unfolds, we learn, what the opposite of murder is life, and how can we help people to be restored and recover and go on about their life. And so, in the same way, as he had mentioned that your holiness must surpass that of the Pharisees, who were perfect at abiding by the letter of the law, but not the heart of the law. And this is what Jesus is getting at. So, we must remember that this is the purpose of Jesus' teaching is to teach the heart of the matter, to take the letter of the law that has been given, and that he has come to fulfill that law by talking about its moral purpose. So, there'd be plenty of people that would, in Jesus' day, that would be successful in not committing adultery in their bodies. But he takes it a step further and basically saying it only ends up in the body because you already started it with planting a seed in your mind. So anybody who has looked lustfully has committed adultery, that person in the heart. Now, it doesn't say what Jesus then recommends as a punishment for that. He's really just bringing attention to the fact that this is where adultery begins and it is dead serious. In fact, I think he's really just bringing to attention, instead of bringing condemnation, I think he's trying to really illuminate the dangers of lust that is within people. Because otherwise, the Old Testament does declare that both parties in an adulterous relationship, a consensual relationship between a married man and a married woman, that constitutes adultery, and both of them should die. But punishment is not in view here. The teaching on lust is what is the important thing that he is teaching. Now he goes on to what we call hyperbole, which is an extreme exaggeration to drive a point home. Although sometimes I wonder if it's because scholars have called it that, him saying cut off your hand, it's better to go into heaven maimed than hell with all your appendages. And part of me is like, I don't think that is a hyperbole because it is better to go to heaven with only one hand than to go to hell with both hands. But nonetheless, he's saying there's these things that are very serious and can take us out morally. He said, so again, he's not focusing on the physical punishment here and now as under the law. He's looking at what the effect of this does to our soul. It kills our soul. Lust kills our soul. And that's a very important thing for us to consider here in this. So he wants us to just nip that in the bud. It's a completely different thing to admire someone for a nice hairstyle or whatever. It's another thing to say, in my mind, I'd like to do something that is unholy. There's a difference between admiration of beauty and then objectifying the person for gratification. And so with that, we can acknowledge and say that someone looks nice on a particular day. And that's not lust, that's just appreciation of something that is nice. The same as you'd look at a bouquet of roses and say that's a beautiful bouquet of roses. But that's where the thoughts end. In fact, I think that Jesus is so emphatic on saying you got to watch even what happens in your mind when it comes to lust, because all throughout the Old Covenant, most of the prophets spoke about Israel's unfaithfulness to God as them being adulterous wives. And I mean, I could have you here all day reading the scriptures to where that is, and the analogies and the teachings are like that. And so, as the same way as God wants us to be fully devoted to Him, He wants His followers to be not running after other pagan gods, not running after pagan ways of things. He's saying the same way He wants husbands to love their wives and love only their wives in mind and in deed. So there's also some schools of thought in the first century in Israel that would state that if someone did commit adultery, if your wife did commit adultery, you didn't really have a choice in the matter. You had to divorce her. It would be a public shame for you to continue on in that marriage. And so it was often like just considered mandatory amongst a great deal of people. And maybe that's why when we learn about Joseph looking to divorce quietly Mary when he found out that she was with baby Jesus. And it took an angel to tell him, saying, no, this she did not commit adultery. This is from the Lord. This is a great miracle that he went back to that relationship. And we can keep in mind too that when we read in Deuteronomy in the 20s, 21, 22, 23, and 24, we also find that a betrothed um, young lady was considered uh, contractually married even though they had not yet come together. So adultery could happen even if the people had yet to be married. So this was like the seriousness of divorce in their day. Now, in Deuteronomy 24, when it talks about to give your wife a certificate of divorce if you cast her aside, in chapter 19 of Matthew, the Pharisees come to Jesus and say, well, you're saying that we can't do it for any and every reason. Then why did Moses say that we can have a certificate of divorce and send her on her way? And Jesus replied with the famous words, because their hearts were hard. That's a very important thing for us to understand, that we let our hearts get hard when a relationship is about to break down, which is why I never do a wedding for somebody if they don't commit to doing premarital classes, because I like to say to young couples that are in love, you don't need me to fall in love. You can do that well on your own. But you might need someone like me to stress test your relationship before you get into this, so you know what you're getting into and you have uh, proper expectations, so that a bitter root never takes hold. And so we just go through different things of seeing, like, how can we see all the dynamics of their lives that maybe at this point in time they're blinded by love and can't see that there are some red flags. That's my job, is not to tell them to get married or not to get married, but just say, here are the risks, here are the threats to your relationship, and here are the joys, and here are the big green flags. And that has gone very well with when people take premarital counseling when it comes to marriage. Next, I also ask people in that premarital counseling that I need you to make this pledge for me, otherwise I will not do this marriage. I believe that marriage is so sacred before God that I need to ask you of this. And I need you to make this commitment to me and to God and to your spouse, your future spouse, right now. And it's this: if even one of you were to say, I think we need to get some help, I think we need to talk to somebody, then you'll actually go do it. Because too many times I have seen people come into my office, they have waited way too long to get counseling. They saw the red flags, the bitter roots started to grow, and then by the time they're asking me to try to fix it, it's like it's beyond repair. You have already gone too far. And that's probably one of the number one things with most vices and most difficult things that happen in life, whether it be leaving a job, recognizing you're falling into addiction. All these things happen by death by a million cuts. And recognizing things early and dealing with things early are going to leave you in a much better status. And so I want to encourage you in that if you are ever to get married and one of you says, I think we need to go to talk to somebody. And at very least, you guys should be, if whoever is married, should be considering on maybe at least a few times a year, not just date nights and stuff like that, but on what are ways that we can do marriage enrichment. What are is there a retreat that we can go on? Is there, what are some ways that we can go work on our own personal self? Maybe there's a men's retreat where he just needs to go and get together with the Lord and a bunch of other godly men and come back a new man. Same with when the wife goes out alone, or then you go out in pairs. My point is, you should be investing in that marriage because it was a sacred vow that you said before God. So another reason why Moses would have permitted a certificate of divorce was to show that this person had been discarded by the husband and isn't, say, a prostitute or a wayward wife or runaway wife, that she's legitimately single again, which would have, in Moses' day, that would have allowed her to remarry by having the certificate of divorce. And elsewise, you'd have to go through a whole different process that I won't get into right now. But that was certainly not the ideal. Jesus also said that the two will become one flesh. He hearkened all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, when it says that God made them male and female, and who God has joined together, let no one pull asunder. And so I want to encourage you in that as well too, that as he goes back to the created order, this is why, Jesus teaching on it and the historical teaching of marriage, why we take a traditional stand here at our church when it comes to what constitutes as marriage between one man and one woman, is just simply this: the created order. Even down to the created order that we see that a few things. Male and female have about the same lifespan, give or take a very small percentage of variation. We can see that they work well as a team, a man and a woman, one kind of looking after it in the traditional sense, raising the children, and one providing by working the field. And that allows for defense, that allows for rearing of the children. We see also that men and women both have a similar birth rate of 50-50. And so that indicates that it is one man, one woman. And the long gestation of a pregnancy and then raising a child until they're self-sufficient is a great deal of time. So when the window of fertility opens to a young couple to when that fertility window closes, that has you having your last child somewhere around the age of 40-ish. And then you're raising a kid for another 15, 20 years. And then after that, you're into your elder years. Thank God we have Medicare that we do today. We can live much longer. But in the ancient world, after then, that was like your whole life. So two people, a man and a woman, getting married and having children was a lifelong commitment between one man and one woman. And the evidence of that is borne out in the just incredible order of God's creation and what we see right before us in physical nature. By the way, we can do that with just about every ordinance and every teaching under the sun, that God has made natural laws so perfect, so constant, so just evident that what he writes in Scripture is what we see every day. Even if you have a hard time understanding of spiritual things, you can understand when things show physically right before you that testify that the Word of God is true. And so this is why we have taken this stance as a church on the sanctity of marriage and to try to never let that pull away. Now, Jesus does teach that there are some reasons to which a person could be guiltless in this. A, if you're a guiltless um, person, that the other person just leaves. The Apostle Paul speaks of this in 1 Corinthians 7 as well, too, saying if the unbeliever abandons you, you're not bound under such circumstance. So sometimes divorce can happen to you, involuntary, and you didn't do anything wrong. So that's what we would call like an innocent party. In this case, because of how society really required people to be married in order to function, it says that Jesus says if you divorce your wife, you're causing her to become an adulteress because he's not basically, he is saying she has to get remarried in order to survive. And that's going to then make her now into the arms of another man who is not her husband, and that's going to cause that adultery. So Jesus is saying here in Matthew chapter 5 that there's a circumstance to which someone could also be an innocent party by having somebody cheat in the relationship. And then divorcing that person wouldn't make them an adulteress or an adulterer. Even if she went and married someone else, that wouldn't be considered adultery because she already would be an adulteress, or he would already be an adulteress. So you're not making them an adulteress by divorcing them. They already are one, and you're just letting them go in that part. And so Jesus does confirm that yes, that is a permissible way. And he doesn't say that it's somehow welcome, that it's somehow desired. It's a breakdown that just really shouldn't happen. This is why he started off this whole thing with watch your lust, because now we end up with all this mess and trying to sort out when and how can you get divorced. And so no, he wasn't saying that your thoughts of lust are grounds for divorce, which some people have argued. What he's alerting you to is the slippery slope to which you go down by doing this abhorrent thing, by taking your eyes off of your spouse and onto somebody else. And then that sin bears full fruit when the action is carried out. And so again, he's not advocating for any type of penalty, or he's not saying, hey, wives, if you catch your husband looking at somebody, you can go divorce him. No, that needs to be addressed very seriously and it needs to be worked on and it can't be tolerated, but that does not mean that it's grounds for divorce. So also we learn, like in Romans 7 and 1 Corinthians 7, that if a spouse dies, you're freed from the law of marriage because, well, simply you're no longer there. You fulfilled your vows till death do you part. So we find that if you are wrongfully divorced and are the innocent party, or if you were cheated on, or if your spouse dies, those are the three major grounds of innocent divorce to which you are absolutely free to go and remarry. But the Apostle Paul also says this. So we're going to talk about, is there a situation to which somebody who was the perpetrator can they ever get remarried again? Well, before we even talk about remarriage of both of those parties, we need to see what the Apostle Paul has said about remarriage just in general, even if someone is widowed. He said in 1 Corinthians to, you know what, guys, you're better off to stay single. We'll continue on doing the work of the Lord. You won't have to be distracted by family affairs. We can be focused on getting this gospel out. Remember, the Apostle Paul forewent having a marriage. A young man with his stature could have easily had a wife, but he did not ever take a wife. He was married to God's church, which is actually kind of why many denominations of Christians want their priests to be unmarried. We don't see that as an absolute prohibition, so we leave that up to the discretion of our pastors and church leaders of whether or not they need that. Because you know what? Sometimes I have found by me having a large family with 4 kids and a wife that we have been able to work with and help people to parent who have younger kids than us, that we have been through that with them. That our life experience and our family dynamic has helped to inspire others in different ways. Yes, if I had never gotten married, I'm sure I could have done more theological training, or I've gone on more mission trips, or spent more time at the church without it affecting anybody else. But I've also found that having a godly family, which, by the way, God did say he wants godly offspring. It's kind of the purpose of two believers coming together, is that he wants a progeny, and then he needs examples as well too in that. So both are holy as long as you're dedicated fully to the Lord. Are you dedicating your marriage to the Lord, or are you dedicating your singleness to the Lord? And the Apostle Paul stops and says, I want you guys to consider being single before you just go with the given, I'm going to get married. Because you know, a lot of people just assume they're going to get married and assume that it's a-okay. Well, you know what? I need to say this. When I learned that in 1 Corinthians 12, when I was young and thinking of marriage, the first thing I needed to ask in prayer was, Lord, do you have for me in your will that I do get married? Or do you wish me to be single? That's a prayer like not a lot of young people want to pray because they're afraid of not getting the right answer. But that's where it starts first, is saying, do I need to stay single? Just because we're so used to just getting into a relationship if you're not in one, we need to ask God, have you called me to singleness? And so he asks the widow to ask that hard question. He asks those who are divorced to ask that question. And then he asks, but then he says, you know what? But it is also good to marry. And it's just, we got to be just not reacting to life circumstances, but being proactive in prayer and saying, Lord, what would you have of me? So, can a Christian get divorced on bad terms and then ever remarry? Well, now we're on to the question of God recognizing or healing that person. I would say if somebody is been a cheater or have dissolved the marriage in a very unresponsible way, then I would say, of course, that person is unfit for marriage going into the future until they could be made fit. So, big question amongst theologians down through the ages were, if you remarry after wrongfully committing adultery, and then you remarry after that, and that's considered adultery, is that a single off event of adultery, or is that a permanent status that you were an adulterer for the rest of your life? I would say that I would believe that it would not be for the entire life, just in keeping with God's redemptive plan throughout history, is that we have sinned against God and we're in a permanent state of rebellion against God, but Christ came to free us from the penalty and slavery of sin and death, and he has given us freedom and healed our hearts. We think of in John chapter 8, when they found a woman caught in adultery, and they brought her to Jesus and said, look, the law says that we should stone such people as these. Now, by this period in time, Moses is ancient to these guys. And with different rulers from the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire before that, and then after all of them, the Romans, which they were currently under, would often prohibit them. And they got away with it a few times, but they often prohibited capital punishment. But by the first century, it was really rare to see a capital punishment of stoning for someone caught in adultery. They would often just get divorced, certificate printed, and you're on your merry way. So these legalists are coming back. Jesus already answered this question and said that, no, I don't want you to get divorced. And he talks about adultery in many of his sermons. So by the time he's in Jerusalem in John chapter 8, by the time that this teaching of his would have no doubt already made it out there. So like, all right, Mr. Tough Guy, if you can't for any other reason than this, are you going to stick the hard line to what Moses said? And then he said the famous words, he who is without sin, throw the first stone. And none of them could throw a stone, and they all dropped their stones and walked away. He turned to the lady and said, your sins are forgiven, go and sin no more. And so with that, we read into that redemption that we see there, that A, you need to go and sin no more. So if you were one of the persons who ruined your marriage, you can't get remarried until A, you're forgiven by the Lord. B, that you have fixed some of those issues, because you know what? Second marriages, even in the world, have a terrible rate of success, often because people don't deal with the issues that caused the first ones in the first place. So remember Jesus teaching on adultery, teaching on murder, teaching on envy, teaching on all these things that start in the heart before they ever get to the body. And they start a bitter root. So you need to be healed. You need to be healed from whatever it was that put you on a bent to want to do something that would torch your own marriage. And then with that once you are healed and forgiven, I see no reason with the grand forgiveness of Christ that if you then pray and ask, Lord, shall I remain single, or do you have somebody for me? That only after all that has taken place would I say that you're free to go and get remarried. But clearly, what Jesus is saying here is these people are taking something as sacred as marriage and treating it so flippantly. Can you imagine, like, I don't know if you ever had times where you've had friends or colleagues around that were doing something so ridiculous, and you had to kind of like be like the head shaker and be like, come on, guys, do you see what you're doing? That's what I believe Jesus is doing here. He's saying, like, you guys are just throwing away your wives. You're giving them a certificate. And it's like, don't you know that you're causing adultery? So while I believe Jesus is telling the absolute truth, I think he's also like hitting it home extra hard to try to get through to them. This is what you're doing. No, I don't think Jesus is trying to tell these people to stone these people to death for that. He's trying to shake them out of their stinking thinking and out of their lustful ways and out of just trying to obey on the outward and look at my flesh and whatever I can do for my own gratification instead of what pleases the Lord. How can I be dedicated to God? How can I be dedicated to my spouse? And how can I be a good Christian on the inside, a good follower of God, not just obeying on the outside, but that I have a heart that understands the precepts of the Lord, that understands the heart of the matter, that what he's trying to teach us, so that my whole being can be changed from the inside out. And this is why I think those final verses are oh so important. They would come up with all kinds of different literally legal requirements. If you swore by this, it didn't count in court. If you swore by this, it did. And they had this convoluted way of telling the truth that people would manipulate, and it say like whether or not how much they believed by what they swore by. And so all of this was meant as a form of manipulation to get people to succumb to your will without you really ever committing fully to it. And so Jesus is saying, you guys got to drop that. This stuff comes from the pit of hell. You're trying to swear to God on God's temple so that you can manipulate this person to get what you want instead of just telling the truth plainly as it is. And Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Let your yes be yes when it comes to loving the Lord and being dedicated to Him. Let your yes be yes when you're standing at the altar and you're vowing to God that you will look after this spouse that you're about to marry. And then when you're making your truth claims to your friends, that you're reliable, that when you say yes or no, your friends can take that to the bank. This is the kind of person God wants us to be, trustworthy. But also, I'd like you to keep in mind that not everybody is privy to all of your truth. Certainly in criminal and serious matters, yes, tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, uh, and and you will be blessed. But people don't need to be nosy, knowing every detail about your life that you might be uncomfortable sharing with a stranger or someone that you're not really that close to yet. That's not lying to withhold information from people to have no business knowing your information. So when we tell people to be truth tellers, I also want to say don't be a doormat, get walked all over. Sometimes you can say, no, that's enough questioning today. Sometimes I do it in a playful way. People ask when I feel like someone's asking too personal of a question or too intrusive of like, this is not information I feel comfortable talking about. Is sometimes you can joke around when they ask a question and then you can just say, hey, you want to know my blood type too? And sometimes it diffuses the situation. The person acknowledges, okay, I've gone a little too far. Let's just go back to talking about things that we both enjoy. And it often works quite well. And so again, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. Most particular that when we make vows before God, when we make vows before a spouse, and we make vows before our friends, let us be found to be trustworthy. Let us found to have truth that resides in our heart, and that we just have an innocent soul that just loves to delight in truth and what is good. And then we can look at the things that have tripped us up in the past. You can say like, hey, if you've ever been one of those people who have committed adultery in your heart, you need to ask, Lord, how did that seed get planted and when? And oftentimes it goes back decades for many people. And the Lord needs to bring a healing there. If you're willing to surrender that to Him, He can make our thoughts pure again. And so I want to encourage you in that He is a good God, He is a forgiving God, and He is a reinstating God if we come to Him. And so with that, I pray that you're released from all the difficulties of your past. I pray that you have a bright future with the Lord. And my hope is that if any of you that are on the other side of this camera who have not dedicated your lives to the Lord, I invite you to simply receive the free gift of salvation by trusting Jesus Christ for your salvation. And understanding that He brings times of refreshing, Acts chapter 2:38, by the Holy Spirit to give you strength, to give you guidance, to help you in your journey to get over the things that used to trip you up. He wants to give you great power to be wholly like Him and to be with the saints. And that journey is going to continue on an ever increasing level this side of heaven and then forevermore in heaven. And I encourage you to be on that journey. Will you do life with us? Well, thank you for coming to church with me today. God bless you. Have a great one.
Let's do something together. Life is better in community. So let me encourage you to reach out to us via the Connect card that you'll see in the description at the bottom of this video. That's your opportunity to just say hi. Let us know you're watching. Let us know how we can be praying for you. Or maybe you have some questions about faith, about our church, or about life in general. We're here to help you, and we're happy to do so. I'd also like to thank those who are faithfully giving. I can't express my thanks enough. We're able to continue ministry in our community and abroad so wonderfully because of your faithfulness of giving the Lord's tithes and your offerings. So to go above and beyond His tithes is just incredible. And so for those of you who want to come and visit us, please know that our service is a gift to you. We never ask for anything from our guests. As a Christian, it is my act of worship to give to the Lord, and each one of us Christians believe that. So if you want to come check us out, there's no pressure. Just come on over. If you did want to give, we have simple ways. Give at regalchurch.com for your e-transfer, no password required. You can drop it in the offering plate on Sundays, or you can drop to the office through the week. Just pop in, say hello, and let us know who you are, and we'd be happy to chat with you. We can also set up automatic deposit. We'll just send you the simple form, and you fill it out and send it back, and it's good to go. So thanks for your time, and God bless you. Thank you.